Virtual Vision FM with your hosts Rev Ted Woodruff,
Era Parisian, Nina Ashby,
and me, Nick Humphreys.
Virtual Vision FM,
your platform to all things spiritual.
Welcome once again to Virtual Vision FM. I'm going to bring on my co-host, Reverend Ted Woodruff, the amazing Ted. And hi, Ted. Let's get right into your 1 minute me moment, and then we will get to the guest for today, the fan favorite, Mr. Simon Ludgate.
Join the club. Good evening, Era. Good evening, everybody. This is the Rev Ted Woodruff, straight into his 1 minute me moment tonight. Those of you who are regulars will know about it. It's been a few months that I've been performing this or instructing this, and it came to me quite some while ago, and it is 60 seconds of taking time for yourself. And basically, in this day and age, we don't get enough time to ourselves. We don't make the time, which is there anyway, but here's an idea for you. Spend a point of your day when the children are at school or you've got a quiet moment in your lunch hour, just taking a little bit of time out for you, and sit yourself down on a chair, as I say, in a quiet moment, and do three things. One, close your eyes. Concentrate on your breathing and breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, and in through your mouth and out through your nose, and that makes you concentrate on your breathing by alternating the direction in which you do it. And at the same time, imagine that you're grounded. And the simplest way to do that, I think, is to imagine a vine joining your ankles together, and take another vine from the middle of that one down, 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 deep into Mother Earth, and attach it around a tree trunk or a boulder or a rock. If you can't visualize that, then just ask whomsoever, spirit, guides or whatever, ask them to ground you, and that'll just make sure it's happened. And the third thing to do is to throw a protection eggshell around yourself, the aura of protection, and choose whichever color you like. I like white and gold because I resonate with those, and I think they're pure colors. If you resonate with purple, green, red, blue, green, whatever, choose that color and throw it round you. And as I often say, there was the Ready Brek Kid advertisement back in the day, and that is the best visualization you could probably have, if you know of it, of throwing that auric cloak, eggshell of protection around you. And then spend the next 60 seconds, 1 minute out of your day, connecting with spirit, with your guides, with loved ones. The loved ones can still be here with us on the earth plane, or they can be passed into the heavenly realm. But take 60 seconds out of your day connecting with them and having that minute for yourself and them. Three things then, remember. Be seated, ground yourself, breathe, and put that eggshell of protection around yourself. And as I do say regularly, you'll probably find it goes to 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, maybe even 10 minutes. It doesn't matter how long it is. But if you start out initially with the idea of just doing 1 minute out of your day, it's a good thing to do on a daily basis. And that essentially, in a nutshell, is what I call the 1 minute me moment.
Thanks, Ted. I really appreciate it. Now, I just want to take a moment and let everyone know we are using a brand new platform today. And, of course, every time you try and use new technology, we're bound to come upon a few glitches. Now, one of the glitches that we have noticed right off the cuff is that people cannot access the chat room or the show before we go to air. And so people have been saying they couldn't get on, and now you can. So if you do have people wondering how to get in to listen to the show live, let them know, please, those of you in the chat room, that they can certainly try and access it one more time. We are broadcasting live, and now I see the chat room is filling up accordingly. So there we go, and we're going to get right to our guest for today, Mr. Simon Ludgate, who is a phenomenon unto himself, let me tell you. When you consider that this man is a TV producer, he is a journalist, a documentarian, a photographer, an author. He has lived, and it continues to live, this phenomenal lifestyle that is right in the corporate world, and yet there is another side to this man in that he is a shaman, that he is a healer. He's been studying the Kabbalah for about 6 months. So to me, Simon Ludgate is the epitome of science meeting metaphysics and developing into this extraordinary human being. And we are so privileged to have him visit our show time and again, and he has become a VVFM fan favorite. So please welcome to the show, Simon Ludgate.
Hi, thanks, Sarah. That was quite a build-up. Here I
Hey.
am, me. Hi.
So it's always a pleasure to have you on the show, and there's
Thank
always so much to talk about with you. And let's start with the Middle East today. That is a huge, huge topic. And, you know, what is going on in Syria as far as you can see, in your opinion? And, you know, let's talk a little bit about what Russia's been up to regarding ISIS over there. So, yeah, have at it. Floor's yours.
Well, whenever I'm thinking about the Middle East, I always think of my diagram of who likes who and who's a friend of who and who's not a friend of who, because it is so complex. And I think that anybody coming to this conversation needs to get their heads around the complexity of the relationships before they even start. I think that the West is a lot more aware of the dynamics of relationships in the Middle East now than they were 10 years ago, even 2 years ago, actually. I think the impact that ISIS have had over the last 2 years have really focused everyone's attention. And for me, the most interesting aspect of the impact of what Russia have done in Syria over the last few weeks is to highlight an untruth. Because the Allies, which is my country and your country, although since the election less so, because Canada's withdrawing its strike force from the theatre of war as a result of Mr. Trudeau's intervention just over the last few days. America and the Allies have been making quite a lot of coin over the last couple of years with their attempts to restrain the march of ISIS. And since Russia has become involved over the last few weeks, I think the last total I read of the number of ISIS targets that they've struck went past 456 a few days ago. It's probably now up to 500 plus. And they are actually doing something about it. And they're actually routing ISIS, which the US have signally failed to do for the last 2 years. And there's a reason for that, in my view. The reason for it is that America has been arming ISIS and has been doing that thing in the Middle East that everyone does, which is my enemy is my best friend. You know, it's such a confusing situation. There is so much duplicity, and there are so many complex relationships. But I think that America has been using ISIS to scare their own people, to manipulate Americans and to get what they want, and to justify spend on the military, and to have the presence in the Middle East, and to have the influence that they have with various Middle Eastern countries like Saudi. And I think that ISIS has just been a massive excuse to shake a demon at the American public, and it's worked. So that's my view.
Well, I totally agree with that. I mean, the war on terror it's not winnable. And it is, it was created by design, and it was to instill fear. And we have things set up like the TSA, and how many terrorists have the TSA actually found?
Well, I don't agree that the war on terror is not winnable, and I think Russia has demonstrated over the last few weeks that ISIS are not the relentless army that they've been portrayed as over the last couple of years. They're just a bunch of poorly armed, really vicious, largely ex-Saddam Hussein army. Um, um, uh, Dispossessed army fighters who were left with nothing in Iraq after Saddam was taken out. That's where ISIS started, and Russia in 3 weeks have apparently decimated them, and it's increased the flood of migrants out of the area into Greece, into Turkey, into Eastern Europe. That flood has now become a torrent because the situation is just getting worse and worse. And I just wonder how many members of ISIS are infiltrating those migrants. Stands to reason that there's got to be quite a few of them. They're all coming into Turkey and Greece, Eastern Europe, Macedonia, and ultimately Germany, and to a lesser extent the UK, which is not ideal in my opinion.
No.
So the situation is very fluid, and it has changed enormously. But it's been used as a terror weapon by the American government on its own people. Something they've got very good at.
Well, they have, and I always take issue with their alerts. It's time to be afraid, very afraid. We don't know for how long you'll have to be afraid, but we'll tell you when to start, and we'll tell you how bad it's going to be, and then nothing happens. And it's a form of conditioning and mind control. And in the chat room, I see Colin has said ISIS was originated by the West and used to get rid of Assad to gain control of the Middle East. I think there's more than one reason why ISIS is around, and there's no doubt in my mind that it was a Western concept and creation. And why is the Middle East so important? It can't just be the oil, Simon.
Complex question, complex situation. I think that it's two parts really. There are so many. Understanding Middle Eastern politics and religion and power and power struggles in the Middle East is extremely difficult. What I would say is that you can't blame America for everything that's gone wrong or as everything that's happened or gone down in the Middle East, ad infinitum. America's only really been a player for the last 100 years. Middle East have been beating each other about the head since the Crusades in 1100. So it's been going on for an awfully long time. Actually, the English were there stealing all their gold at that time. So we were fighting a holy war against them with the birth of Islam and the newish Christian religion, and with a slightly older Jewish religion thrown in, plus lots of others. It's fantastically complicated, and the more you read about the origins of the Middle East, the more you realize how complicated it is. I mean, without going into a massive history lesson about the Mesopotamians and the Alexandrians and the Romans and everybody else who's had a pop, basically. Mm-hmm. Don't forget the Philistines and the Phoenicians. It's been a land that everybody has swept over. And the second part of that about it being more than just more than just political infighting, which I think is really valid. And I take your point about that, is that everybody has wanted to own basically the land of Canaan, which is now Israel, and the surrounding area, because it is such an intensely spiritual part of the planet for all sorts of reasons. You know, there is a reason why Alexander wanted to control the Solomon's temple and King David's Mount and Jerusalem. To my mind, Jerusalem is probably the most important, powerful spiritual symbol, and I'm not quite sure why, but it is for me it's the crucible of the origin of everything, the origin of religion, which is what I've been studying, as you mentioned at the beginning, for the last 6 months, which has been fascinating. I've been studying Kabbalah, which originated in Jerusalem 2,000 years. The Zohar, which the Kabbalistic creed is based on, was written 2,000 years before Jesus appeared in the Middle East. And the teachings of the Kabbalah were suppressed by the Jews and didn't really reappear until the Middle Ages, about 1550. And what's interesting about it, what's fascinating about it, is that it was the inspiration for the Torah in Judaism and for the Bible. And they are all not dissimilar. Actually, the Quran is not dissimilar. They have the same sort of stories and the same sort of characters. But this appears to be the font from where it all came. What's really fascinating, and what's been so interesting for me, is that it matches my own research and conclusions and the spiritual conclusions that I've arrived at over the last 10 years in a sort of accidental way. Hence the name of my book.
Yes.
But it matches and it resonates with it 100%, which has been the most amazing experience. It's been the most amazing affirmation over the last 6 months that even things as esoteric as what angels are and what they consist of and how large they are and how they work and how they download information from God or the light or whatever you want to call it, or the universe, there's no disagreement. And I quite often say, well, this has been my interpretation and this is how they appear to me, and my teachers and my mentor will go, yep, that's what we think too. And it's just been amazing, because I've spent my whole life being corrected and argued with on matters of theology. And it's also important to point out that it's not a cult. It's very poorly understood because people don't know much about it, and it's not a religion. It doesn't insist that you have a certain view, and there is only one way of interpreting things. And it's incredibly connected to science. A lot of their leaders, like Rav Berg, who's a phenomenally important and famous figure in Kabbalah, translated the whole of all 22 volumes of the original Zohar with his sons, which was the most amazing feat. So it means that people like me who can't read Aramaic,
yes,
although I think I can speak it actually,
no.
but who can't necessarily read it, they've translated it, the whole thing, and it's just the most massive work, and it's beautiful. It's
Wow.
it's a beautiful thing, and it's it's not didactic. It's not sort of, well, we're going to burn you at the stake if you don't, comply with us. There's no wrong answer.
Yes.
And that has been an incredibly important thread for me over the last 6 months, because I've been looking for that sort of key forever and didn't know where it was. And I kind of feel that I found it now, which is fantastic.
Well, I think, Simon, there's nothing more validating than having the experiences and then reading something or investigating something and finding something that absolutely matches. So you're not having the experience predicated on what you've read. You're having the experience stand alone and then having it validated. And
for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
For the first time in my life, which is extraordinary.
It's powerful and it's profound and it's life-changing. And that is the kind of shift that is available to everyone. And we just have to be mindful and live deliberately and consciously and move towards it. It can happen in any moment. What I love about the Kabbalah, the way you've explained it, and correct me if I'm wrong, like you say, it really is has a lot to do with science. It integrates science into the spiritual realm. That to me is very, very interesting, because it speaks to that gigantic immutable law, the law of correspondence, where everything has to correspond to another. And this is at play all the time. It's at play with with each and every one of us and each other and every living thing and everything that has a frequency. Everything needs to correspond, and that's what it sounds like the Kabbalah does. Is like it pulls everything together and shows you how in alignment everything is always.
It does. I mean, when Copernicus managed to prove that the sun was at the center of our solar system and that the Earth revolved around it, they wanted to burn him at the stake. And there was a stripping away there was a divergence between science and belief and theology in the Middle Ages, because it was designed to divide and rule. I mean, it seemed like, to me, the process of the disintegration of the sort of the alchemist's role in the Iron Age, Bronze Age, in the sort of 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries, as religion really took a hold on the planet in the Middle Ages with the Renaissance. Science and religion said goodbye to each other, or science and belief said goodbye to each other, and it was a hugely destructive thing, because for thousands of years humans used both things totally in tandem. And I read a book just recently by Rav Berg, who's now unfortunately no longer with us. I mean, he died only quite recently, actually, on nano, and it talks about how, and this is a really important thing, the metaphysical aspects of the origins of the universe and quantum and nano, and how we are beginning to get to grips with nano, with 3D printers are a kind of a transition into using nano, and how one day we'll be able to produce the most amazing machines out of a thing the size of a fridge by rearranging the atoms in something. Because the point is that everything, like the machine I'm using to talk to you on, and me and you, are all constructed of atoms. But they just have different information, so they take a different form. But they're all the same atoms. And I would suggest that all the same atoms have existed since the beginning of time. We just keep on moving them around. So the way that people incarnate into a physical body is just a rearrangement of the atoms. And with different information, there'd be a table or a glass or whatever it is. But it's the same atoms. That's a really important thing. That's my important and interesting fact for the day, is that atoms are all the same. They've just got different information.
Well, exactly. It's like a computer program, and when you consider that atoms, we're empty space. We're absolutely empty space. And it's the programming, it's the data, it's the atoms and what they're carrying and the frequency in which they vibrate. that's what causes us to have differentiation with all things. But yeah, it's absolutely amazing. Now, how long? Now, this is a subjective question, Simon. How long does it take, do you think, to go through the entire Kabbalah? You've been at it for 6 months, and you've gone through 3 volumes. Did you say 3 parts?
Well, three parts. It's never ending. My mentor, who's a lovely guy called Matthew, has been studying Kabbalah for, I think, 13 or 14 years.
Yeah.
And our teacher, Avi, who's actually Moroccan originally, who's the most amazing guy, has been doing it for over 20 years. So it's ongoing. I mean, it's infinite.
It's a lifestyle. It's a way of life.
It's very profound and complicated, and it's like all knowledge, actually, is that the more you find out, the less you realize you know. And I think that's probably a permanent state. But
Yes.
I mean, I have only just lifted a tiny sort of corner on the, like a little piece of carpet I've lifted up and had a little peek inside, and feel like I've already been exposed to a lot of information. But actually, it's just a really tiny part of it. Really tiny part of it. It is it's very big. It's a very big subject. It's very profound, and it does feel very pure, very clean, very unfiddled with. And it what I love about it is that even the way the Zohar is written, everyone always says, "Oh, that's like that film Don't Mess with the Zohar with Ben Stiller." But I mean, it's kind of, that was his joke on it. It doesn't have that sort of whiff of male ego that the Bible has, for instance, where you're reading it and you think, well, there's good stuff here, but there's an awful lot of ego that seems to be splattered over the top in the way that it's presented. And 500 years ago, I'd have definitely been burnt at the stake for saying that, but I think it's true. It feels a lot less filtered and manipulated and messy. I mean, I'm one of the few people I know who's actually read the entire Old Testament and New Testament from start to finish like a book, because I wanted to kind of get a feel of it. And it just felt like a really messy ragbag of bits and pieces. The writing's all over the place, the times, it spans centuries. And it feels like what it is, which is a great big book with a whole load of complex stuff shoved into it. But it just feels, it's like looking at a really untidy file on someone's desk, to me, the Bible. And the Zohar really feels like you're getting a direct download from God, which is been my experience personally, over the years, over the last 10 years or so, where I have received information that has felt like it's coming directly from the light. It's not something that people have told me. It's just stuff that appears in my head, and you quite often get words and phrases that you'd have no idea what they are. Then you look them up. You were saying this earlier before we came on air. You look them up, and suddenly they have meaning, a fantastic meaning. You go, well, I didn't just come up with that. That came to me because that was so both random and profound that there has to be more to the way that I receive that information. So this seems right to me. It seems lacking in ego.
Yes, and I think too the way it sounds to me is that, and I have to agree. I mean, I've spent enough time with the Bible, and it does take you here, there, and everywhere with no real. It's almost written like you weren't supposed to understand it and just take someone else's word for it, and that other person's word is nothing more than their own interpretation. And that interpretation gives license to instill fear. And that interpretation instills the necessity of, you need to supplement us because, we're religion and we're higher than you and we're more knowledgeable than you, and they use it to extract, separate people from their money kind of thing.
Mm.
With the Kabbalah, doesn't sound like there is any of that going on. It sounds like it doesn't inspire fear, and it doesn't threaten, like you have to believe the way we tell you to believe this, or else you're all going to go to hell, right? It's just a stark contrast towards what
Well, they don't subscribe to the idea of hell.
Well, neither do I.
I mean, their view is that hell was created as, like you were saying, as a scare tactic, sort of Roman Catholic Church's version of ISIS. It's the same stuff.
Yes, it's
Yes.
right. That's it.
Yes, it's the same psychology. It's the same old routine, and they've got very good at it. Kabbalists believe that we're in a 6,000-year cycle. Like the Mayans had the same view that there was a cycle. In their case, it was 5,000 something or other, 252 years or something. They think that we're at the end of that cycle, and we've got another 224 years to go before we evolve like a butterfly, and old age, our inability to transform ourselves, telekinesis, telepathy, so on and so forth. We will learn all these things, and that sounds a bit ambitious and unrealistic. But when you think of what the human race has achieved in the last 100 years, if you know your science history over the last 100 years with the exponential growth and the speed of computers and what they can do in space travel, medicine, what we know now. Somebody told me the other day that they reckon that the Times newspaper has the same amount of information in it every day that somebody living 150 years ago would ever learn in their entire life, unless they were a poet laureate or a theologian or a professor. But that would be your average kind of woodcutter who lived in a village in upstate New York or lived on Victoria Island in Vancouver. That would be the extent of their knowledge in their entire life, just one day of the Times newspaper. The amount of information that we process now and generate, there has been an absolutely extraordinary exponential rate of growth in the beat of the human race's kind of technological heart. With, if you look at what's happened with computing in the last 100 years, in the last 10 years, in the last 2 years, it's an exponential, increasingly accelerated rate of growth. So another 224 years, if we haven't destroyed ourselves, it's mind-boggling what we'll do because of the rate of change. I mean, I wish I could sort of show you a kind of a chart on this, but just imagine us virtually flatlining for hundreds and hundreds of years in terms of our knowledge and scientific expertise and development and discovery, and then the last century, it's a vertical line, and it's an accelerating vertical line as well. It's incredible. So something's happening. Something's going on with our consciousness, and I think that there is a increasing amount of information that's being downloaded, and it's sort of being downloaded as fast as we can absorb it. The sort of if the information was turned up anymore, I think we'd all kind of burn out. So we're kind of receiving it as fast as they can download it to us, and there's this whole conversation around transdimensional beings and entities from that vibrate at a different frequency to us, that are all around us in other dimensions. That's kind of coming through, and there's information coming through from them, which is accelerating our rate of growth massively. And I think that's causing a schism. And I think that's why you're seeing people who are frightened and who have darkness in their hearts clinging to it even more tightly and wanting to kill even more people, because when you give somebody a massive amount of pure energy and pure light and pure love, some people, they start to ascend and they start to vibrate at a higher rate and become more aware, and information appears in their heads. That happens with people with darkness in their hearts. Their first instinct is to get a machine gun out and kill everybody. I don't understand quite why that happens, but it does, and that seems to be happening in our world now. There's polarity. You seem to have more extreme, more awful violence. With Boko Haram and ISIS and all the other terror organizations, and the kind of acts of violence you see between humans and animals. The whole conversation about animals that's a whole program in itself, right?
Yeah, true.
It's not right what we're doing to animals.
Yeah.
Ecologically, it's not right.
Well, look what we do to ourselves. Look what we do to each other.
A cotton T-shirt and a pair of jeans takes 22,000 litres of water to produce. 22,000 litres of water. A kilo of beef takes something absolutely amazing, like 1,000 gallons of water, and God knows how many tons of grass, and so on and so forth. And I think it's about choice. I think all of this is about freedom of choice.
Mm-hmm.
When people sort of say, "Oh, well, why did everyone get killed in the First World War?" and 34,000 people got killed in one night when they bombed Hamburg in the Second World War. Why did that happen? And if there was a God, he wouldn't let it happen. The point is, it is allowed to happen because it's freedom of choice. If humans had no freedom of choice, we wouldn't be humans. We'd just be robots. There'd be no point to anything. So we have to figure this out. Sorry, this is kind of quite complex, and I'm ranting a bit, but this is really important. Is that we have this choice. We do have freedom of choice. We always have had. So we have the choice not to eat animals, or not to eat as many of them. We have the choice not to kill each other. I mean, how hard can that be? How hard can it be not to hack your neighbour to bits? Quite hard, apparently, but I mean, why?
Yeah. Well, it's amazing, what we are capable of doing to each other. And, we believe that we're the superior animal on the planet. And so we don't even think twice about what's being done to animals.
No.
And that in itself is deplorable in my mind. And we just need to. Well, actually, I agree with you, Simon. It is a choice, and we have to be inspired into making the choice that is for the greater good. And if you are within a vibrational frequency that keeps suppressing you and oppressing you, then the only choice you feel you have is the other direction, and that isn't the way to go, for sure.
I have another thought for you, which is a bit of a bumper sticker, but it's a really good one.
Okay.
That guy, was his name Richard Reed, the shoe bomber who caused us all to have to take our shoes off when we're going through security. One guy fails to set fire to his feet on a plane, right?
Yes.
And that has made, throughout the world, every time you go through security, you have to take your darn shoes off, which is crazy and annoys me so much. It's really unhygienic. One guy. And yet, how many mass shootings have they had in America over the last 2 years? And what difference has that made to the gun laws? Nothing.
Nothing.
What an insane world we're living in.
Well, that to me is all about conditioning. that to me, that airport thing, I feel like a cow being herded through, you know, into the next corral kind of thing.
Well,
It is
again, it's
all
about
about
control. Again, it feels like when you do it, it's like, you're just being controlled.
yeah. Yeah, I'm being controlled. I think I called myself a cow. I don't think that's a good thing, actually. When we think about the Middle East, I just want to bring this back a little bit. And ISIS. And now public opinion is shifting when it comes to Putin.
Yes.
Because, the United States and Canada for the last while, but no longer, thank gosh, has been bombing the heck out of Syria, saying that we're doing this to get rid of ISIS, to contain ISIS. And it hasn't done anything but, made a lot of people rich. And then here we have Putin, who has been looked upon as a monster on the planet, walks in and bombs pertinent areas and is taking care of ISIS. And it's taken a matter of a couple of days, right, to really kind of show that he's
Well, a
powerful
couple of
enough
weeks,
to make a
yeah.
difference. So why is it when we're marching towards this new world order, why is it that suddenly the shift is on that Putin is the good guy? I'm not saying he's good or bad. I'm just as public. When really, to me, he's just playing a role. He's just doing his part, and it's all to further
Well,
the larger scheme.
he's been spun, but he's been spun by the US, and the situation's been spun. There is a traditional enmity between East and West. It goes back to the Cold War, and the Cold War was another form of manipulation, in my opinion. But Putin has been suppressed. You haven't heard Putin's voice over the last 5 years. All you've done is seen pictures which have either tried to make him look foolish by riding his horse bare-chested and sort of saying, "Look at a show off he is," or just pictures of him looking grumpy.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been very, very little depiction of him speaking. And when I was in Oklahoma a few weeks ago, I saw an interview. I can't remember the guy's name, but he was a fairly major American broadcaster, interviewer type, maybe on CNN. It wasn't Anderson. It was an older guy, but he did this really long interview with Putin and asked him some quite searching questions, and Putin answered really well. It was very. I mean, I know that anyone can say anything, and you can sort of depict yourself as anything, but he came across as being quite reasonable, and quite human, and quite balanced. And I think that action speaks louder than words. And I keep coming back to the impact that they've had over the last few weeks, and it's revised my opinion about where Russia are coming from, and about his view. It's slightly scary because Turkey have declared an intifada on Saudi, which is pretty frightening as a sort of side issue. And I don't know what would happen if China got involved with Syria as well. I mean, I don't think they will, because it's not their style these days. They just stay very, very quiet and just buy everybody. But the situation has turned around when it felt like it was in stasis, and we just kept on hearing about more and more atrocities committed by ISIS, which have been very carefully fed into the media for the last couple of years. And it's when I was in the States recently, I was talking to lots of friends who own guns and talking about the gun laws and about ISIS and all that sort of stuff, and they're saying, well, we don't want to be overrun by ISIS. And it's like, well, you're not going to be. You're in America. That's never going to happen. I mean, you might get the occasional terrorist bomber, but they're not going to turn up at the gates. I mean, it's not like the sort of the gates at the sort of the Goths at the gates.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. So why do you need all these guns? Well, self-protection. Self-protection from what? I mean, and I still don't really know, to be honest. Oh, our government. Our government are going to. We're going to declare martial rule, and they're running all these exercises at the moment, practicing for when they're going to take over the country. And Americans are very paranoid, and I'm not sure that they really have much reason to be.
Well, they've always been that way, and when you look at the history, and I know you're a real history buff there, Simon, the United States, I'm not saying this to be nasty or create hard feelings, but it is a country that is one of the most violent countries. We think, Ireland has been that way with their bombings. What was the IRA or something? Um,
Yeah, the IRA. Yeah.
yeah, but the United States, they've created the United States out of violence, and well, they are one of the most violent countries in the world.
Yeah.
So when their citizens are saying, well, we need to protect ourselves, like I'm kind of sitting back saying, yeah, well, could be an idea because you never know who's going to turn on who.
Well, the country um, has the gun has been part of American culture since they arrived. I mean, well, it was us originally. I mean, I think that most of them came from Britain and turned into Americans, and the gun has been part of their culture since the beginning. And I'm doubtful that that's ever really going to change that much because it is so ingrained. But things can change. I mean, I was reading today that they're trying to pass some legislation that will change the gun laws at the moment, which they're sort of slipping through quietly because they need to do
They need
something.
to do something, but I
You can't
don't
get away
know.
from the fact that America has 10,000 murders a year.
Well, I
Uh,
was just going to say that Canada has just as many guns, I think, as the U.S., and yet our murders by gun is not
yeah,
even on the same
but
scale.
Britain, which has only got 1/5 of the population of the United States, had 35 murders last year. 35. So if you do the maths, if you multiply 35 by 5, that's what's that, 240 something or other or something like that. It's not 10,000.
No,
So I mean, an American friend of mine was trying to tell me that we had the same murder rate. It's like, no, we don't.
you don't.
Um,
No way.
and if we all had, if everyone was armed to the teeth, and if everyone carried a gun in their handbag, and it's bad enough with knives here. I mean, we have a real problem with knives in big cities. We have a real problem with people stabbing each other with knives. But again, it's still small numbers. But I mean, by our standards, it's a problem because all these kids carry knives and they use them. If you carry a gun, you're going to use it at some point, or you've got the option to use it. I mean, I know a guy in the States who carries a gun the whole time, and it's not that uncommon at all. A lot of people do.
Well, I think it's the condition of the carrier, and when we think about what we're bombarded with, that is to condition us. We have the chemtrails, we have vaccinations, we have all sorts of things that are altering the way we are to function. And
Yeah.
how is it that every shooting, the mass shooting, like at the schools and theaters and all that kind of stuff, that one guy, that did it all was on some sort of medication.
Mm. Yep.
It's almost like our medication is causing or inducing psychosis in some ways, right? It's not healthy. And so we're looking at gun control, but I look at a gun on a table and I know that gun has the potential to kill, but it's the person that's holding it that is the crucial element of that equation, don't you think?
Another thing I mean, that's the whole medication thing and the pharmacological big pharma conversation is a massive subject. It's a big business. There is a reason why they haven't found a cure for cancer because
Yeah.
American cancer industry is 160 billion a year industry. Guess what? Worst thing that could happen is you actually find a cure.
Yeah.
And I would say that most industry professionals working in that industry wouldn't see that and would get very upset about it. But they don't have they don't really have the perspective and the objectivity to really be able to understand how that works. But it is all about money. And then you get weird things happening, like some of the parents in the Sandy Hook shooting, from what I could see, seem to be the same people talking about the Boston bombing.
Mm-hmm.
Very weird.
Yeah, it's very strange.
And even the father of that poor unfortunate girl who got shot in where was it? Just recently, they were doing a news story. A girl in
Oh,
a
the
caravan,
reporter, yeah.
and they got shot by that guy who used to work at the station.
Mm-hmm.
I thought the girl's father was a bit strange.
Yeah.
And what you're seeing, I think, globally, is that you are seeing more and more clear evidence of manipulation and more of evidence of a controlling elite. I mean, it's almost a cliche now, but it's the best way to describe it, a controlling elite who are running the world. And it's not as if, it's working. Their population control methods and their manipulation of economies and wars and peoples to do what they want is working, and you can see it happening all the time. I'm not quite sure. I get the feeling that Russia aren't part of it. I get the feeling that there is a sort of a chunk of the world where you don't see it happening, and it's almost like the economic group that Russia have formed as an alternative to the World Trade Organization, the WTO, which is your country, my country, America, and so on and so forth, Japan. But Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, I get the feeling, although they all have their secret services and they all manipulate their own countries, like everyone does, but they don't seem to be part of it. There seems to be this club that doesn't include them, and I get the impression, rightly or wrongly, that Russia's policy in the Middle East is not driven by a desire for world domination. It's driven by a desire to maintain the status quo, maintain Russia as it is, and maintain their relationship with their strategic partners like China. But they don't. I get the impression that they don't seem to be part of the club. They're not a part of the mega corporations in the West, like the banks and the oil companies. I mean, they're competitors. And those banks and oil companies seem to have been doing a really good job of hobbling Russia over the last 3 years with with the sanctions that are being imposed on them. Russia's economy has really taken a slide. The ruble has taken a slide. The amount of investment in Russia has taken a dive. Their oil price is really weak. I mean, they've done this deal selling coal and oil and gas actually to China now, which is just as well, because 25 years ago China said they'd probably have to invade Russia to get the coal out of Siberia, but it seems like they're going to do it politely rather than have a war about it.
Well, they seem to be very close allies now,
They
because I
are.
knew when the United
So we as part
States.
as of last week.
Yeah, well, I remember when Russia annexed the Crimea, and the United States did not like that, and they were planning some sort of action, and China stepped in and said to the United States, "Don't even go there, don't even think it, because we will be all over you." And so that backed the USA off. And now Russia seems to be taking more of a center stage when it comes to global politicking and the wars that are going on, etc., and being more helpful. And it kind of seems to me that Russia is really gaining strength, possibly because of China and that alliance that has been formed. And I don't know when
Well,
that.
that segs us actually very neatly on a little bit of an update on MH370 and MH17, because as we've discussed before, I took the view, because I did a lot of investigation into MH370 and wrote about it quite a lot, and MH17. I took the view that one plane had become the other, and it was being eventually it was used as an attempt to try and turn world feeling against Russia by having the Russian separatists shoot it down, or allegedly shoot it down over the Ukraine. I still don't buy that. I still think that it was shot down by somebody who wasn't the Russian separatists, and there's a reason for that, which is the spread pattern on the missile on MH17 didn't match the current version of the missile that the Russian separatists were using. Now it's a bit of a kind of Jane's book of military weapons type of thing, which will go over most people's heads probably. But missiles explode in different ways, and the Russians said this missile was not the one that they're using at the moment because its spread pattern and the way that it exploded and its whole characteristics were of the old type that we used to use. So that's been completely ignored and just brushed away by the Dutch investigation and by the West. And I would wager, I don't know, but I would wager at least $5 that no one spoke to the Russians at any point about what they thought or for any information. I would pretty much guarantee that whole investigation has gone ahead without any kind of comparing of notes with the Russians, who obviously, designed the weapon, were ultimately accused of being responsible for it. But the whole thing about it was that overall it didn't work, even though I think that whole very, very nefarious situation had a lot of mission creep, where what they were going to do with it originally and why MH370 disappeared and what happened subsequently. I think that there was a lot of changing of minds, and they just thought, oh, let's stick it into the Ukraine and make it look like Putin did it. And it's not that wild a theory, because there is a lot of historical precedent that supports. I mean, there are dozens and dozens of things that have come to light because of the 50-year rule about information, where so many countries, and in particular America and Britain and Israel to an extent, have run false flag operations designed to discredit their enemies or create a civil war or start a war, or give them a reason for doing what they ultimately did. I mean, it happens. 747s get shot down by the Chinese, by the Russians. We still don't know what happened to TWA 800 coming out of New York. I think that was shot down by mistake, and it was covered up. These things happen. Big commercial planes full of innocent people have been shot down, and you can read about all of it. This is not sort of a figment of our imagination. These are facts about things that have been shot down for spying and after warnings, or have been shot down by mistake. But it happens. So it's entirely in the realm of credibility that there was something very weird going on with MH370 and something very strange going on with MH17. And how strange that just recently, when they ran that news report about 3 weeks ago saying that those Filipino fishermen, a guy and his daughter from I can't remember the name of the island, it's like Subang or something, had found a great big airplane in the jungle with everyone still strapped in. And then the Philippine Navy went to look for it and couldn't find it. I was like, you'd think that they'd be able to take them to the thing that they said that they'd found, because it's such a big airplane. And also, a big airplane makes a great big hole in the jungle when it crashes. It's sort of £500,000 weight airplane.
It didn't surprise me because they couldn't see an airplane going against its own flight pattern. When you look at flight patterns in the sky in any given moment, there's thousands of planes. I don't know how they just don't all kind of, crashing together. But when you have an airliner veering off of its flight pattern, how can it not notice?
there was a lot of lying about that. But the
Yeah.
interesting thing is that if MH370 had crashed in the Philippines, in the area that this fisherman said that he'd found the plane, it would have actually been on the true track going east of that plane, because the point that they lost it was about 8 seconds before it got to the waypoint north of Malaysia, where it would turn left, i.e., turn north and head to Beijing. That's where they lost. That's where they say they had their last communication with it. So whatever happened, if something had happened, like they'd all lost consciousness or there'd been a fire, I don't buy that, because of the how safe modern planes are, and the redundancy they have in the safety systems, and the distance between the control systems. They have 3 control systems. They're about 3 feet apart. Unlikely that would happen. But anyway, if it kept on that track, that's where it could easily have come down after about another hour of flying. So it's just kind of interesting that if you look at the map and you look up the island in the Philippines in relation to the waypoint north of Malaysia, it's on the right track. So it's quite credible that that's, if it did go down, that's where it would have gone down, rather than it turning around and flying south and going down to Australia and all that hoo-ha.
Yeah, and it's always sort of been mysterious that this particular plane that was carrying all these Americans who had a patent for an energy, a different energy type vehicle, that they were going to Singapore to demonstrate this thing, and all the patent holders for that particular vehicle were on that plane except for one. And the way the contract for the patent was drafted was that if everybody died, the remaining patent owner would inherit the entire patent. And isn't it interesting that that's exactly what happened? So, this is how conspiracy theories are born, when something as mysterious as a plane disappearing.
Yeah, you're talking about Lord Rothschild, and actually they were going to Beijing, not Singapore, and it was
yes, that's it.
two patents for a type of new, very hard to block radar jammer. So it's like a sort of a double thing. It was a new technology. It was something they patented, which for missile technology to stop anti-missile jamming from jamming the missile. And they also had a new kind of chip, which I think that's what you're thinking with in terms of energy. A new fantastically fast chip that was, again, to be used in missile systems that they had. There does seem to be some sort of credence in the idea that when they all went down, there would only be one remaining patent holder. But my feeling is that wasn't the reason. That was just a kind of a good story that was.
It was the bonus.
Yeah, my feeling was that it was a much more complex military intervention, because there are so many elements. The Chinese and the Russians and the Americans with their satellites. There was Malaysian commercial radar. There was Malaysian military radar, which has a much greater range and is able to track a plane when it's not even transmitting an identity. It works off a return. Secondary radar, it's called. There are an awful lot of people who would have been witness to it, and if the plane had been booby-trapped or interfered with, again, you could see that it's something that a CIA operative, like an ex-Boeing guy, would be able to do. I mean, the 777 has an inspection hatch that's right in front of all the avionics at the front of the plane that is accessible from the outside at all times. You don't lock it. You can't lock it. So anybody has the ability to get into that plane and monkey around with transponders or any of the main electronics at the front of the plane. which again people don't know. But if you're a Boeing engineer, and I've seen videos about it online, so Boeing engineers demonstrating this fact. You know, if you know that, you slip in, fiddle around, disable something or fiddle with the software, and you have a plane that goes missing.
Yeah.
It's complex, and I mean, I'd love to know what the truth of it is, and I'd love to know what really happened, and hopefully one day we will find out.
We will one day, and you know, you kind of have to wonder if that will even be the truth. But we have to go with what we feel, for sure, because that's the antenna with which we need to function. Ted, do you have something that you would like to contribute here?
Oh, heavens, yes. I mean, we've got about 10 minutes of the show left. For the listeners' and viewers' benefit, at least I have Simon's company on a fairly regular basis, and we get through about 5.5 hours of going off into the universe and everything. So, hence I've allowed Era to sort of lead the show today. We've got about 10 minutes. You've already answered most of the questions that I had already had in my mind as you went through things. That's just the way that our conversations and minds seem to work. But I was just wondering, in the last few minutes of the show, a complete flip away from what you just been discussing, but and I know it is a complete flip, but for the benefit of everybody who's going to listen in again and is listening now, Halloween's approaching. Everybody's very into all this scare stuff and ghosts and ghoulies and all this sort of thing. Being the Orb man that you are, and as people may or may not know on here, Simon is the author of The Accidental Wizard and is very much into the orb phenomena, and he will explain about the archangelic and the angelic connections he believes in. What's your take on this time of year and the relevance and the sensibleness of it and the humanity of the fact that we do seem to celebrate it and go off into this rather dark area, in my opinion, compared to the regular love and light spiritual of quite a lot of our zones?
Well, Ted, now I think the viewers will kind of get an idea of why you and I spend 5.5 hours talking to each other every time we meet up, because what you just asked me is an incredibly complicated question. I'll pick some bits out of it. One, this is a time of year naturally where the veil is a lot thinner. It's just the way it works. It's like the tide. Because of a whole load of factors, the ability of trans-dimensional beings and entities to slip through it, and my left ear is now beginning to really whistle, so I'm definitely onto something here. Their ability to communicate with us and appear and to impact on us gets easier for them, and it becomes more common. And it just happens at this time of year because of the time of year, because of where the planets are, because where we are in our sort of annual consciousness and the scheme of things, and all sorts of reasons. It makes it easier, so they're more apparent, so we feel it, so we associate it with that experience. I think also it's the time of year that the dark side becomes stronger. It's where the Satanist covens do their sacrifices. I mean, Halloween, this is not very kind of kiddie friendly, but it's where they will sacrifice children, drink their blood, go through all their sort of Satanistic rituals, misguided fools that they are, and it's where they have their most, it's where they're naturally at their strongest. It's where they commune with their spirits the most, and where they're at their strongest. And I think because of obviously commerciality has a big impact. It's always been a big American thing, which has always been big in America, and it's now become big in Europe and big in the United Kingdom, out of sort of commercial drive, which has nothing to do with anything, but it's just that people tend to, have a bit of fun. It's an excuse to sort of dress up, muck about. But actually there is a sort of darker side to it where that is exploited by the forces of darkness. And I see Halloween as being a time to be protected, to make sure that you're very safe, to not indulge the forces of darkness, and to keep your heart clean and pure, and look to the light, and not allow one more period where the forces of darkness are able to drag us down into the pit, if you like. I shall be up Glastonbury Tor on Halloween on the 31st. I'm sure along with a lot of really annoying drunk people and idiots, but despite all of that, I find that if I go really late when it's really cold, most of them kind of wimp out and go home. So it's a good way of getting rid of them is just to go late. But that's where I'll be, and that will be an opportunity to connect with my guides and to connect with Archangel Michael, who the tour is his domain, and other archangels and angels. So I'm really looking forward to it, because it will be a very powerful night where some interesting things are bound to happen.
So just on that, and unfortunately we've got like 3 or 4 minutes left, do you feel that that is the counterbalance by you going to such a place as Glastonbury, counterbalances the negatives, as perhaps you see it, or the darker side of it, the aspect? For you, that's the place to go for the more light aspect,
yes,
rather than the darker.
The tour is, for me, is like a battery, and it's always been very important for me spiritually, and I talk about it a lot in my book. And I've had some incredible experiences there, and taken some really incredible pictures which defy explanation. Most incredible things, 50-foot streams of orbs going through the air, and all kinds of things, incredible things. And it is a portal. It's an incredibly important place, and I sort of go there to kind of protect it as well, because it gets monkeyed around with energetically by a lot of people, and quite often when I arrive there, it feels like ancient Egypt, it feels like something out of South America, it feels like something out of somewhere quite dark, and the energy gets changed because all sorts of people go there, and everyone kind of casts their spells on it and reprograms it. So I go along and reprogram it back to us.
Cool. Well, that's a good, I think, heading towards the end of the show. I just wanted to say, as far as the chat room and folks who are listening and anyone in the future, we welcome your contributions. We absolutely do. And even if it is something that disagrees with the guest or ourselves, then that aspect, certainly from my point of view, and I'm sure Simon and Era's, is to be welcomed, because it is all about discussion. We don't all believe the same things, but it makes it far more interesting. And I noticed Colin had a couple of things that he didn't agree with necessarily, but keep them coming, because we know sufficient to be able to argue our cases and assimilate information from you guys. You're part of the whole process. I'd also like to say that I am blessed indeed to have Simon as a personal friend, and we get together a couple of times a year. It's never enough, even if it's a few hours. And he will be at some stage, I would imagine next year, popping down to do some sort of workshop, so you folks will be able to see the guy, meet the guy, as you have done here in person. When I explained to the group on a Wednesday about, this guy's been down and about him, you only touch the surface, because it's only words by explanation, and they can only get just a little glimpse of what he's about. And he is, as Era said at the top of the show, and has become evident, he is the author, the Reiki master, the shaman, the spiritual man, a TV director, documentary maker. He has an opinion on geopolitics around the world, chemtrails, so many different facets, and Kabbalah most recently. So blessed to have him as a friend. Thanks for being on, Simon. And I'll hand back to Era to close.
Thanks so much. Really good line of questioning there, Ted. That was interesting to listen to. I want to encourage our viewers, and those are the viewers live in the chat room right now, and those who will be viewing this show via archive later. I would encourage you all to visit yournewswire.com, where Simon is actually a contributor at that website, and he does amazing, amazing articles that are really inclusive of a lot of detail and research. So he's very dedicated, and he really knows what he's talking about. So if you'd like to learn more about what he thinks on various topics, please visit yournewswire.com and read some of his articles. Thank you so much, Simon. It's been
My pleasure.
an absolute pleasure. And, you know, I said at the top of the show that you're a fan favorite. Well, you're one of my favorites, too. So let's hope that we get to see you back here fairly soon. There's so much more to talk to you about.
It's my pleasure.
All right.
Thank you very much.
We will see you next week, where we will have Sage on our show. And she is a healer and runs a spiritual retreat healing center out of the Dominican Republic, and so she'll be speaking to all of us about her work and what she is offering at present. So that is something that might interest all of you. So from us, all of us, to all of you, we will see.
Bye-bye.
You have been listening to Virtual Vision FM.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or contact us at our website www.virtualvisionfm.com.
We want to hear from you because you matter.
Virtual Vision FM.
Your platform to all things spiritual.